it's Hira here, and we are right in the middle of consulting case prep interviews for the first years. And, I thought I'm just have a very short break. I've already done about 8 of these back to back, and it's going to be a long day. But I have a quick break, and I thought, let me just share one thing that should be useful across the board, because this comes up all the time. I mean, I see this every year, and it happens in virtually 80% of the cases that I do. And it's a small thing, but I think it could make a huge difference. And that is in the delivery of your recommendation, right? So remember how there's a very formulaic way that typically students are taught to do this, and that is, you give what your recommendation is, you mention 2 or 3 risk factors, and then you mention next steps. And the whole thing, people usually kind of go through that in probably 2 minutes to 3-4 minutes. So it's after all that discussion and all the rich pieces that you covered in the interview, there's a very narrow band there, right? That's not totally capturing everything. And remember, this is the client-facing piece, right? So you might have all kinds of things that you're talking about raising, how with cases, sometimes you go down a path, it's not the right path, then you go on another one. And so, you're exploring all these different things. But eventually it is clear at the end what the recommendation is to a certain extent. And then what are the pertinent issues that you need to raise with the client? And so I think, in my experience, and also it's just intuition in terms of what I would think a client would like to see, is, and that's what firms do want to, really they're kind of looking for this, right? Because a lot of times the analytical piece and the numbers and the math and all of that, I mean, by the time you're interviewing with a top firm, and if you're from a top school, you've got that, right? So it's really what they want to see is that client piece and the client interaction piece and the ability to deliver, a concise and yet robust recommendation to the client that, just covers a lot of things, brings up a lot of issues, and, shows your acumen, shows your expertise. So I would say, remember to you might have raised some really great things even as early as when you were doing your framework, and certainly in the discussion, the rest of the interview. And then just make sure that you bring that back into the picture when you do your final recommendation. So the way I normally advise students is, normally the interviewer says, well, are you ready to make your final recommendation? At which point you say, well, can I have a few minutes? And then you jot down what that final recommendation is, and then some other things. So what I always say to students is list every single thing that is important here, right? That impacts this recommendation that you're making. So the recommendation is usually something very simple, like given what we know here, I would advise that it's usually a buy decision, a sell decision. It's calculating a bid price or sale price, but really, the value is in everything around that, right? So it's the assumptions. It's and every one of those assumptions could be a 15-minute conversation, right? So just and often students cover all of this. It's simply that they forget to bring it home to the client. So I would say, list down, I mean, it should at least be 10 things, if not 20 things, of what is important when you deliver that recommendation. So it's not, this is what I mean by whether it's risk factors or supporting factors or whatever. And then, if you feel like the interviewer is a bit antsy for time or whatever, I mean, you would always say, look, I think it's very important that we raise these issues, and I would very much like to go through them. But they might just say, you might get a sense that there's some pushback, then you can always say, look, let me just cover a couple of them, right? So that, that way you're not overstepping your bounds. But I think it is very important, and to the extent that you can, to be a little bit assertive about, these are the things I need to talk to the client about, and I would appreciate the time to make sure that, you know, I've covered all that with the client. And then, you know, and next steps, that's can be very brief. But I would really like to see a lot more in those recommendations, simply because that's one place that you can differentiate yourself. Okay, thank you. Bye.